Chapter 10. Telekinetically Speaking. Benjamin probably should have felt more nervous walking into telekinesis, his first class of summer school, but years of making frog legs wiggle in science class gave him confidence. But then a balding black man teleported into the classroom, and telekinesis as Benjamin knew it was gone forever. The teacher looked them over, his eyes narrowing more with every second which went by. My name is Pantheros Pavlos, and one thing I will not tolerate is goofing around. You may overhear some of the older students calling me the Panther behind my back. That is not a behavior I would encourage you to mimic. You may refer to me as Pantheros if you would like, or Mr. Pavlos if you feel you must. Benjamin tried not to squirm in his seat. He dared to shoot a sideways glance over to Andy, but Andy's eyes were glued to the Panther. As this is beginner telekinesis, I do not expect much of you, the Panther continued. If you're too good, you'll be stuck with me in years to come. That is not a recommendation to hide your abilities. I will know if you are, and you will be sorry. The Panther laced his fingers and turned his palms outward, cracking his knuckles. Now, where should we begin? Ryan Jordan raised his hand. How about a demonstration? That was a rhetorical question, Mr. Jordan, the Panther said. I certainly do not need suggestions on how to teach. But since you asked... The Panther looked at the students, and their frozen faces looked back, and then every chair in the room lifted into the air. Benjamin looked at Andy, and couldn't hold back the wide smile that broke onto his face. Andy grinned back. Benjamin looked over to Gary and saw his hands clenching the sides of his chair. Gary gave a nervous laugh. The chairs kept lifting, higher and higher, until they all hovered near the ceiling. Is this the kind of demonstration you were looking for, Mr. Jordan? The Panther asked. Ryan, pale-faced and shaking, held on to his chair for dear life. Yes, this is fine, Mr. Pavlos, Ryan called down. Okay, then. The chairs and students descended to the floor, settling down with barely a sound. Benjamin jumped up and started applauding, followed quickly by Andy, and then the remainder of the class. Thank you, the Panther said. I'm glad you liked my little demonstration. He cleared his throat. I'll be spending the next hour getting an idea of your ability. You'll be competing with each other all summer, and I need to know how best to pair you up. Who's first? Ryan quickly raised his hand. Fine, Mr. Jordan, you will be first. Front of the room. Ryan immediately walked up next to the Panther, who turned to face him. He pointed to a large display of stones, varying from about the size of a fist to larger than a man. Pick a stone and lift it and hold it there for 30 seconds. Ryan glanced at the stones and bit his lip, before settling on one of medium weight, about the size of a small pumpkin. The stone wobbled, and then rose off the ground. At 25 seconds the stone started to shake, and by the end of the 30-second period it wobbled so violently Benjamin was afraid it might fly over out of control and hit him. Should I be wearing a helmet? Andy asked. Benjamin and Heidi busted out laughing, but Ryan glared at Andy in return. A bad display, perhaps, but a strong natural ability, the Panther said. Who's next? Gary went next. He chose the lightest stone he could find, and just barely held it in the air for 5 seconds. Heidi chose a stone about the size of a brick, though after 10 seconds it fell to the floor with a loud crash. Iva picked a stone about the size of a dinner plate. She lifted her arms as she held it in the air for the full 30 seconds, guiding it with her arms back down to the ground. Her face retained its usual calm composure the entire time. This isn't ballet class, Jonathan Sheehan called out. Benjamin looked over as he said it and noticed Ryan punched him on the shoulder in response. Well done, Ms. Marinina. An elegant display of grace under pressure, the Panther commended her. Iva's eyes lit up and she smiled. Andy selected a stone just bigger than Ryan's, glaring at Ryan as he did so. Ryan pretended to look the other way. Andy easily lifted the stone high in the air and held it there, spinning it for effect. The class applauded as the stone spun faster and faster. Andy smiled and bowed, forgetting to watch what he was doing. The stone immediately fell toward the floor, being stopped mid-fall by the Panther, who set it upon the ground. Ryan Jordan and Jonathan Sheehan fell over laughing. So who needs the helmet now? Ryan called out. The Panther pointed his finger at Andy. Mind the object of your telekinesis, Mr. Grow. Irresponsible telekinesis is just one of the many ways to get kicked out of school. Andy's face turned beet red, and he quickly returned to his seat, avoiding looking at Iva as he sat down. Benjamin felt Andy's intense embarrassment through the alliance bond. He'd have to be sure to make fun of Andy later. Finally only Benjamin remained. He got up and made his way to the center of the classroom. Pick the biggest one, Jack said, suddenly appearing on his shoulder. Benjamin jumped in surprise. He hadn't seen the small man since the day before. Jack smiled and waved to him. What, are you nuts? It must weigh 500 pounds, Benjamin replied in his mind. So what if you can't lift it? At least you'll have tried, Jack answered. Hey, no fair if the Nautical helps him, Ryan said. I'm not going to help, Jack answered Ryan. He doesn't need any help. Without another word, Jack vanished. So which will it be? The Panther asked Benjamin as the class watched. Benjamin looked at the largest stone. It was huge. How could he ever lift that? It must be impossible. He didn't want to embarrass himself in front of everyone like Andy had, but he also didn't want it to look like Andy was better at telekinesis. Okay, so not the heaviest one, but definitely something bigger than Ryan or Andy. He'd show them who was the best at telekinesis. Levitating the beach ball-sized rock was hard at first, much harder than he actually would have thought. But come to think of it, the only things he'd really spent much time levitating in the past were frogs and dinner plates. But though it was hard, he did lift it and hold it for the entire 30 seconds. The class applauded, not as loudly as they had for Andy, but they did applaud. Through the alliance bond, he felt Andy's presence and a slight bit of jealousy to go along with it. Benjamin smiled. He was better.